Good evening all, and welcome. Camping can be fun and relaxing when you're out in nature, but be warned, there can be a darker side to this recreational pastime. Before we begin though, don't forget to download the Mortis Media Bedtime Stories app to your phone now for even more stories. You can find a link in the description. But for now, get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was maybe 10, a friend and I were walking on a road near the river when we spotted a tipped-over canoe. Having been in the fairly shallow river many times before, we didn't think twice about stepping in to push the canoe up and out. But just as I leveraged the ground, it seemed to disappear. I was sucked down into a pit and tumbled around like a rag doll, only to be spit back out maybe 20 feet downstream and sucked under again. This happened over and over, as my friend was running alongside to try and get a hold of me. Luckily, I was being shot to the surface often enough to get a little air before going back under. He eventually reached me with a branch, and I was able to get out. We didn't make a second attempt on the canoe, and I didn't tell anyone about the experience for fear of getting into trouble. But a few days later, we learnt that an elderly couple had drowned while camping just upstream. Their canoe tipped over, and the undertow took care of the rest. I was nearly killed trying to get the same canoe that had just killed 2 other people. I was road tripping around and just sleeping in my car at random campsites. I came up to one night. It was near a gorge that would make for an awesome sunrise walk. I settled in. I was fast asleep when the feeling of dread snuck in. I opened my eyes to a man in traditional war paint, Aboriginal Australian, staring in my window. My heart went mad, and I got the distinct feeling of anger directed at me. He didn't want me there. I can't describe how certain I was that I was trespassing and unwelcome. I can still see his face clearly as day in my mind. I heeded his advice and moved to another campsite. I returned in daylight the next day and read the history of the gorge. It was the site of a horrible massacre where the white settlers had trapped the Aboriginals inside. No wonder he didn't want me there. This happened around 2 years ago while riding quads with my boyfriend. It wasn't too late at night, perhaps around 10 p.m. We were camping at our campground where we have a small trailer surrounded by other camps. In the summer it's full of kids running around and adults on golf carts, but it was late December and we were one of the few people who go up in the winter since it gets cold and they shut the water off. The woods are a decent bit away from the actual campground. It gets pretty quiet out there, and something about the snow just makes everything quieter. I've always felt slightly uncomfortable in the woods at night. My boyfriend told me I was just a paranoid person, and I chalked it up to me reading too much creepypasta as a kid. I always felt somewhat safer, since we were on a quad, and we could go pretty fast if need be. So there we are in the middle of the night enjoying a cold ride, drifting in the snow, when all of a sudden, we come to a stop. That's when I get an eerie feeling. I asked him why we stopped, and it was something along the lines of his glove or something fell off. We turned the quad and bent over, messing with something. I start looking behind me and around me, because I like to be aware of my surroundings. I look to my left and see a brown skinny tree. I mistake it as something else, but I look to the right of the scary tree and see something even taller and pale looking. I immediately avert my attention from it, being totally freaked out. I find the courage to look back, and it seems closer. At this time I wasn't wearing my glasses and was just saying it was another tree that looks a bit like a person and I'm fine. But before I can say anything to my boyfriend, he had finished whatever it was he was doing, and we took off. I buried my face in the back of his jacket, too afraid to see anything else. Still having that feeling of being watched over me, I asked if we can go back to camp, and he agreed since it was so cold we could. I decided not to say anything to him, since he'd want to go back and investigate or straight up not believe me and write me off as paranoid again. I did not want to go back there at all. I figured the following day we would go back into the woods during daytime, and I would see that there was another tree that I'd never noticed before. But when we went back through, there was nothing next to the brown tree, and that was when my stomach dropped. That's also when I told him I saw something last night. He told me I should have told him, which he was right about. I should have said something, but was too scared and just kept it to myself. We still go up there occasionally, not as much now due to our jobs, but I've never experienced anything else after that, and have never seen that strange shape again. A few winters ago, some friends and I went on a road trip in West Virginia. We decided to camp on top of Hawksbill Mountain, even though the shelter there is off limits for overnight campers. They even cemented the fireplace to discourage people. The night started off well enough, and the stars made for some decent long exposures. Eventually, the wind and cold made us all head back to the shelter to get ready to sleep. I don't remember if we were still awake or awoken by the noise. The noise was like nothing I had ever heard before, and have a hard time describing since it's been so long. The best comparison I can think of is Native American throat singing or didgeridoo mixed with some sort of beat like drums. It was very rhythmic and very terrifying. If you've ever been to the top of Hawksbill, you know there is a semi-large cliff directly in front of the shelter, and behind is all trees. The noise was coming from over the cliff, seemingly in the valley, where no hikers would be, and regardless it was past midnight and pitch black. It's hard to explain, but the noise was terrifying. It was haunting, and really chilled your bones. Half the group wanted to leave everything behind and sprint the maybe 1 mile trail back to the car. The other half didn't want to leave, and I think we were all too scared to move. It lasted for hours. I fell asleep after about 2 to 3 hours of this. Nothing strange happened in the morning, but we were all haunted by it. It's still the scariest thing I've ever experienced camping, and I'm extremely suspect of the supernatural. But this changed my mind a bit. Reflecting on it now, it's easy to dismiss the experience, but I and the rest of us remember being truly terrified of whatever was making that noise. I don't think it could have been the wind, as once it started it never stopped, and as I said it was rhythmic like a song, like something playing an instrument from another world. Since then I've gone back to Hawksbill once overnight, but nothing happened. I don't know what really happened that night. I'm curious if some others have camped Hawksbill and experienced a similar event. While visiting a few friends in Seattle, we decided to have a bonfire along the Putrid Sound late at night. We first arrived to tons of police and firefighters. Apparently a fight had ended badly amongst the transient folk. We wait it out and get some food until it all clears. It's 3 in the morning by the time we make it back, and started a fire by the water. Perfect. No one around. While we're at our fire in the woods that's running along the edge of the water, come a few transient people. They ask to join our fire. Loud, drunk, tweaked out, and smelly. They start vomiting out stupid transient words. It's cold, we're friendly, and what harm are they? As they babble on, we start noticing small details, like the girl had fresh cuts all over her arms and one along her neck. Also signs of faint bruising starting to form on her face. I can't go into better detail, but long story short, the girl and her weak boyfriend started bragging about their transient fight that ends with them kicking in some girl's head. We get smart, have a few sidebar whisper conversations and shared expressions to formulate a plan. Basically, we acted impressed and friendly, and we built the fire up big, and we say, "Stay warm, we're gonna get going." As soon as we walk away, we call the cops and let them know the two tweakers are staying warm and tweaked next to our big friendly fire. Driving away from the parking lot, we see 3 cop cars with lights heading off in the opposite direction. Long story short, we were sharing a bonfire with possible murderers. To understand my story, you have to know a tiny bit about trespassing laws here in Scotland, in that we don't have any, so long as you're respectful and non-destructive. You can walk over any hills you like, and in my case, camp on any beach of your choosing, so long as once you leave the area, it's left how you found it. I used to love camping when I was little. Our family would go multiple times a year with a large group of my parents' friends and their kids. On average, there were maybe 10 of us at the time, which was a bit of a logistical challenge since we always headed out to this one really remote beach on the coast. Actually, we weren't the only ones. There were always yachts bobbing just off the shores with people in them, and other campers lining up and down the beach. Most of them also had children or teenagers, so it wasn't a wild party scene. It was very much an informal family holiday spot. There was even a small building with toilets and showers installed nearby. Even though this was the middle of nowhere, I guess the local council must have figured it out and got sick of people peeing behind bushes. We took a trip up in spring 2011. I'm really bad with time, but I know this because I got my dog in winter of 2010. After picking her out that November from the shelter as a birthday gift from me to me, as I had paid her adoption fee. I called her Parmesan. I decided to name her Parmesan, and she came to me as a 6-month-old puppy who had been rescued from a dogfighting situation. We're not entirely sure what breed she is exactly, but my best guess is a Lurcher/Staffy mix. She is a wonderfully well-tempered dog with people, and most dogs, but you absolutely do not threaten her, because she will have you. So by the time this camping trip came around, I'd had Parmesan for a few months. She'd never come camping with us before, but as far as my entire family were concerned, dogs go on camping trips. So when we all piled into the car, she came too. Unusually though, none of the family friends could make it, so it was only me, my sister, my mum and dad. I didn't mind. I wasn't that attached to the other kids anyway. I'd rather play with my dog, and I'd still have my sister. The drive took the best part of 6 hours, and because we left a bit late, although I don't remember why we left later than normal, we arrived around sunset, which isn't the best time to be building a tent, but we'd expected to arrive to other campers already set up and to beach-illuminated campfires, but this time the beach was empty. In spite of this, my parents started taking stuff out and trying to build the tent. They asked us to fetch some of the lighter bags from the boot of the car while they were pointing a flashlight at the sand to see properly. I rolled down the window of the car for Parmesan to get out. It was pretty hot that time of year, and I wanted her to have air. Always got to be looking out for my little furry homie. As we're fumbling around in the dark on a beach in the middle of nowhere, it's pretty spooky. The one road that led to this beach was circular and had a bridge over the water, meaning you could basically circle around the beach like a big O shape if you felt like it. I was complaining, as kids do, about being tired. After maybe 15 minutes of my dad trying to nail the tent to the sand, my mum asked him, had he seen the car drive around? It had been a few times. My dad shrugged her off. He's sort of like that. I don't know if he said anything back to her, but after a few more minutes a car pulled up next to ours on the road and someone got out. It was maybe 15 or 20 feet from the cars to where we were, and the light was pretty low except for the torches. We weren't expecting to see anyone else here at this point, and I think my mum said it must be the security. I don't know why a random beach would have security. I think what she meant was the Wildlife Trust or something, as they do occasionally come down to do a nosy. The guy was walking pretty unevenly. He must have been high, drunk, or both, because he had that stagger to him. There was absolutely no way this guy was sober. Cool. A junkie. Not an unsafe find, but it's rare to see them in the wild. As he walked into the flashlight range, we realized he was carrying a large knife, maybe 15 inches, although I was small at the time, so perhaps my sense of scale was a little off. I don't like my dad, but credit to him, once he saw this, he got up immediately, holding onto the camping mallet, and put us all behind him. The man began to shout wildly at us that we can't camp here, and he was just letting us know. My dad tried to initially be a bit low-key with the guy and told him that it was fine, we'd leave, but this didn't work. He kept coming closer to us, so my dad started shouting at the man to keep back. My sister and I were now crying. I remember shaking. I was utterly terrified, as I'm sure anyone would be in this situation. It really did seem like the guy and my dad were going to fight, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't fancy my dad's chances. While it's grim to consider, I was absolutely convinced he would have killed my dad, and possibly us as well, once he was done, as I didn't think my mother would have had the common sense to run with us. I love her, but she's always put Dad and her relationship with him above us. This isn't how it went down. A bolt from the black like a wolf descending upon its prey took us all by surprise, most of all the man with the knife. In that moment, Parmesan was the apex predator, large canines representing nature. She got him good by the arm and clamped down hard, ripping his jacket and shredding the skin underneath. He dropped the knife as it had been in that arm that she got him. He kicked her, he punched her, and eventually got her off. He grabbed the knife from the sand and ran back to his car and drove off. Parmesan did not follow. She stayed with us, muzzle covered in blood. As quick as we could, we gathered our things and all got back to the car, pretty shaken up about the incident. I looked her over and she was okay, but the car's window were much more open than I'd left it. We think what happened was when the shouting started, she must have put her paws on the gap I left for her, as it was an old car and had the rolly down windows, not the electric button kind. She must have been able to hit it with her paws to force it down enough to squeeze out. This is not the end of the story though. We were all pretty scared, and since we had the dog with us, we couldn't book a hotel for the night. My parents decided to just drive home so that we would all feel safe, but first had to drive into the nearest town for petrol, as they were kind of low. I spent the time trying to clean Parmesan up a little. I'd always loved dogs, but what she'd done for me blew my mind. As we drove into town and came across a petrol station, it looked closed. My dad drove up closer to get a better look, and stuck his head out the window to get a look at the sign. My mum asked him what on earth he was doing, and he told her he was trying to see when it opens. Never. My heart sank. Parked in the corner behind a van, so we hadn't seen him at first, was the man with the knife. He was sitting on the bonnet of his car using some tissue paper to clean up his arm. It looked pretty bad. Without stopping to refuel or look anywhere else, my dad drove right out of there. He decided to go to the next town over, but this was remove. The next town over was 60 miles away. He didn't have that much petrol, we realized, as we began driving. We were going to break down. That's fine, Dad said. We had AA cover, and they would come and tow us home, or at least to somewhere acceptable for the night. Better than staying in that last town. After driving for perhaps 5 minutes, lights flashed from behind us. Another car. In fact, the same car the man had been driving. It was him, following us. He knew that we were low on petrol. The next half hour was one of the worst half hours of my life. I had a complete and utter breakdown, as did everyone else really. I could tell my parents were trying to keep it under wraps so that they wouldn't upset us, but we weren't really little kids. We were both double digits, and we knew how dangerous this situation was. Dad turned off the radio to conserve petrol, and the man followed us for 55 miles before he peeled away onto another road. Our fuel meter was on the big red E empty for the last 10 miles, and we were driving on fumes. I don't really believe in God, but if he does exist, that was definitely one of his miracles. Once we got there, we drove into a petrol station and refilled to a full tank before driving the rest of the way home. Sister and I slept in the car after that. I only woke up once we made it all the way home. Just grateful nothing worse had happened than that. After getting some sleep, my mum phoned the non-emergency line for the police and reported what had happened. They never got back to her after that, but apparently the woman she spoke to said they may wish to in future, as he matched the description given of a suspect wanted in relation to a murder charge. No idea if it was actually the guy or someone else. As I said, they never got back to her. So what's the takeaway then? Other than crazy man on the beach, let's not meet. Well, for me it's that I love Parmesan. She's still with us now, old as the hills and twice as grizzled as one of my mum's friends likes to joke. I don't know why she did what she did that day. I couldn't tell you what her thought process was. What I can tell you is that this poor puppy was born into an environment where they abused and neglected her, only to be rescued and taken to a shelter, where her mother and siblings all found homes before her. Despite how badly people had treated her, when I took her home she forgave but never forgot. I think the saying is, never trust a person who doesn't like a dog, but I always trust a dog when they don't like a person. They have a very good understanding of human body language, and I think she must have understood how much danger we were in. If you're able to, please adopt. You might find yourself in a situation like mine one day, and I promise you if you're willing to save a four-legged friend's life, they will pay you back tenfold if they're able to, without a thought for their own safety. I paid about £78 for Parmesan's adoption fee, which is a lot when you're a kid, but it chills me to the bones, knowing if I hadn't been so insistent on a dog, I might be dead. Back last year in the summer, sometime around June or July, my parents and I went camping, but they allowed me to bring a friend. There were 2 tents, my friend's and mine, and then my parents'. They were close, but were more into the trees. The campsite was decently sized. One half to the right was next to another campsite, and the other side, the left, was where our tent was. That led directly into a very densely forested area. On about our 3rd day there, it was getting super late, and we had a long day, so we all just decided to go to sleep. My friend and I weren't really chatting for hours, just random little snippets, and my friend saying that they needed to use the restroom, but didn't want to this late. Later, both of us had pointed out how weirdly quiet the forest was that night, but didn't think too much of it. After half hour, my friend and I were on the brink of falling asleep, when we heard something brush against the tent. Neither of us questioned this, as we were right in the trees, and it was probably a raccoon. Not too long after, we heard brushing up against the tent multiple more times, all around too, the sides, the walls, even the roof. At this point, both of us were a little freaked out, but we didn't want to use words as to not alert whatever was outside, so we just stared at each other. Luckily, the sounds eventually subsided, and we were able to drift off to sleep. The next morning when I awoke, I left the tent and sat by the fire my parents had started. I told my mum about all of the brushing against the tent, and she expressed it was probably just a raccoon. She had me convinced on that until she told me something else. My mum frequently uses the restroom and had gotten up super late last night and saw what she assumed was my friend staring down at the tent. Thinking that my friend was going to get to the bathroom before her, my mum rushed to the restroom, and when she returned, the person was gone. The thought slightly unsettled me, but I didn't question it too much, since my friend did say they needed to use the restroom previously that night. Once my friend woke up, I asked them if they did end up using the restroom after all. They told me they hadn't. I then explained to them what my mum told me, and it left both of us very unsettled. Even if my friend did get up to use the restroom, I would have known, as they'd have needed to walk over me, and I'm not a deep sleeper whatsoever. Nothing like that ever happened any other night to our knowledge, and it still freaks me out just thinking about it. My 2 dogs and my now fiancé, drove a long way to get to our campsite in the Ozarks. Berkshire Recreational Area to be exact, and it's west of Mountain View, Arkansas. We drove all day, Wednesday, May 19th, to get to our campsite and set up by dark. We are completely alone at the campground. It's the middle of the week, and the week before Memorial Day. And the camp we chose is a recreational area, which means no electronic hookups, water or bathrooms, and definitely no camp staff. As we're setting up, I hear this bass-like rhythmic noise that I'm only noticing in my subconscious. I don't know why, but I'm feeling like something is wrong. He and I kept setting up our otherwise perfect campsite until I noticed both our dogs staring across the small mountain river and into the forest beyond it. Then I asked myself, haven't I been hearing this strange noise coming from that direction? And now they hear it too? I asked my boyfriend to stop rattling tent stakes and lend his ear to this noise. He hears it, and the dogs are even more alerted to it since all other noises, including literally all of the bugs, frogs and birds, not to mention our own unpacking noises and us chanting, have ceased. At first we write it off. It must be some new mountain noise that we just aren't accustomed to, as we live in a relatively flat region of the country, and my boyfriend says that it could be the rocks settling. I didn't think that was quite right, but I'm not about to go investigate in dusk in bear country before camp is set up. As we're putting the final touches up, like rugs and some solar string lights for the nights to come, the noise gets louder. I would say they were almost comprehensible. They weren't just a bassy noise anymore. The noise had bass, but it wasn't just bass. It's almost articulated, like it was making nonsensical syllables, then pausing and making more. It got closer and closer, like it was coming towards the edge of the small river opposite us, and I swear on everything I love that it was talking in some strange static, like you were stopped by your car with busted speakers at a stoplight, and they were blaring goth trap music. Just the talking part though, and with your windows up, no music, just loud, muffled mumbling and static. I really hope that makes sense. The description isn't the best. I had a hard time not telling my boyfriend that we should just go. We had both heard it as well as the dogs, but it quickly got further and then went away almost completely. So we decided to zip ourselves up in the tent and try to sleep. I woke up many times during the first night to my female dog trembling and growling, and then I strained and listened. I could hear that same muffled bass noise in the distance once again. I did manage to sleep a few hours that first night and morning, thankfully. The following 3 nights were completely normal. They were filled with sounds of tree frogs, bullfrogs, whippoorwills, cicadas and owls, just like you'd imagine from the mountains at night. On Friday night, we got a couple of neighbor campers with us, and even more on Saturday. My boyfriend also proposed in the middle of a shallow river on our big 18-mile hike, and of course I said yes. Other than that strange ominous noise that accompanied us on our first night, it was the best trip I could have ever asked for. I'm just wondering if anyone here might have a rational answer to what that was. A few years back, I was backpacking with my girlfriend deep in a state park in northeast Pennsylvania. Late one night I couldn't sleep. The woods are spooky at night, and I saw a floating light. Both me and my girlfriend could see the light through the thin fabric of our tent as it floated up and down, slowly coming closer to us. I thought it was another hiker, a forest ranger, but nope, silence. I was freaking out. I verified that she could see it too, and I yelled. I even called out. It was still silent. I was too freaked out to open the zipper. The light approached from a few dozen yards away, traveling in a wave path up and down. The light made a circle around our tent, coming as close as about 3 feet. The next day at the ranger station, I asked if anyone had reported seeing floating lights, and naturally they say no. The only explanation I could believe was that I had encountered a truly unexplainable phenomenon. I was reluctant to call it a ghost or an alien. I normally don't believe in anything like that, so my mind just couldn't wrap itself around what I had seen. 2 years later, my girlfriend and I were hiking a couple of dozen miles in a different forest in northern Pennsylvania. Same tent. Late one night, I couldn't sleep again and saw a light through the fabric of my tent. Again, I verified that both I and my girlfriend could see the light. It got closer, floating up and down just like before, when suddenly it landed on the tent. It was at that moment I realized it was a firefly, a goddamn firefly the whole time. Sometimes fireflies don't turn off their butts for a while. Sometimes they leave their light on so they can fly around, scaring the hell out of innocent hikers. I've often wondered how many floating light orb stories could be explained away by damn fireflies. My husband and I were camping with 2 friends in a pretty remote area deep in the mountains, on the shore of a small lake. Our first morning there, I decided to paddleboard to the other side of the lake. One thing about me, I have submechanophobia, which is a fear of submerged objects in water. It doesn't affect me too badly. I love the water, but I get the heebie-jeebies when I see sunken boats, large fallen trees, or massive boulders. Stuff like that. It gets worse when I'm alone. I do pretty okay when others are around me, and it has to be a large, clear body of water. Swimming pools, rivers, or lakes where the water isn't very clear doesn't bother me. So I go off by myself on board. The lake is one big oval, so you can basically see everything from the shoreline. However, where we had set up camp, you couldn't see the whole lake, so I quickly lost sight of my husband. I started to freak out a little bit, because I had immediately seen a large sunken tree. This is a high Sierra lake, so the water is crystal clear, but quickly turns black because of how deep it is. I told myself I was being silly, and needed to overcome my phobia. I didn't really see anything else, but I decided to stay close to the shore because usually that makes me feel better, but this lake doesn't really have a typical shoreline. It's all granite rock that quickly and steeply drops into the water. I still don't really see much in the water, but I'm really starting to panic, which is weird. I have this overwhelming feeling to go back as fast as I can, but I think I'm being dumb. I try to breathe deeply because I really want to get onto the other side, where there's a waterfall I'd like to see. So I trudge on, trying to calm myself and enjoy nature, yet still feeling like I should go back. As I'm paddling, I start to realize how alone I am. I keep looking around hoping to see a hiker, but I'm completely alone. I am trying to not think about that because I'm almost at the waterfall and the view is gorgeous. As I get closer, I see there is an island, a large amount of granite that is fairly close to the shore. There is a single plastic chair sitting on the island, which is funny, but slightly unsettling because it's such a weird thing to see so deep in nature. I'm still freaked out, so figured if I got off board and onto the island I would feel better, because I would be on land, and my phobia would no longer bother me. As I pull my board, I start walking around trying to enjoy the view, and I just can't. I feel terrified. The waterfall is so much louder now that I'm near it, and I realize that if I were to scream, no one would hear me. My husband is probably the only person around for miles, and he can't see or hear me. I'm terrified. I keep looking around, because I have a feeling like I'm being watched. I decide I cannot take this any longer. Even if it is just my stupid irrational fear, I know I have to get back as quickly as I can. I get on my board and paddle down to the center of the lake rather than keep it on the shore because it's quicker that way. It takes everything in me to do it. I can't shake the feeling I'm being watched, and I feel so damn vulnerable in the center of this deep black lake. I'm shaking the whole way back. But as I'm getting closer to camp, relief sweeps through me. I get off the board and go see my husband. He happily asks me how it went, and I can't talk. He asks me if I'm okay, and I just start crying. I tell him I think my stupid phobia made me panic, even though I didn't really see anything in the water. I feel totally insane, and I'm just happy our friends aren't back from their hike to see me behaving so irrationally. We left later that day. Since then, I've become more open to the unknown. I was thinking about it, and it suddenly hit me that maybe something was going on and it wasn't just my phobia. Especially because I never really saw anything that triggered it. I'm not sure if I just freaked out because I was alone, the phobia, or something else. I guess I'll never know. But I'm curious if any others have ever experienced anything like this before. This happened in 2018 December, just before Christmas. Me, two of my lads, we were 17 at the time, and a cousin of mine who was 15 were camping in the woods at one of said friend's properties. We were there for 5 days, pretty much did all by ourselves except for water that we could hike back to the house to and grab for the day, since it was pretty impractical to get water for ourselves for 5 days, as this region is relatively dry with no water filters. We lie down pretty early, which felt rather primitive, literally when the sun set. Every night we'd hear boars around our tent and steps. Paranoia fueled it a lot, but we had bows, 2 axes and some large knives. One day though, I think this was either the last night or the one before that, we were just having a chat after dinner, like we would do often, and we heard a scream. It was pretty odd, didn't sound human, but I have no clue what animal would be doing it either, and I'd like to say that I know a fair amount about our country's fauna. The scream sounded like it had a build-up, not like a scream where you immediately hear the loudest part and then it dies and fades out, but it started low and got real intense then stopped. I'd say it was around 50 meters or so away, but then it happened again and again, now suddenly coming from more sides, and way more sides, and it was getting pretty close. It didn't sound super menacing, even though we were mad scared, shooting my airgun with no rounds to make it louder. It got to the point where the sound seemed like it was coming right from where the campfire couldn't shed any light. I remembered that we had set up some traps for rabbits down the trail that day, so we grew as many balls as we could and went there. The bait was gone, traps unarmed, and stupid idea anyway, rabbits didn't scream like that. We had some pretty strong flashlights, but we couldn't see a thing. Suddenly, everything stopped. It was one of the most terrifying experiences I'd ever had, and every time someone asks me for a scary story, I share this one. I wish I could get some explanation on this. I'd never heard of any animal to do this, much less communally. Also, I live in Portugal. The country doesn't have any cougars or anything, which is one of the things that I could kind of think it might be. To this day, I still have no explanation. I tried getting some stuff from friends and family, 4chan, on what they think it could be, but still, I'm at a loss. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. If you made it this far, I think it's safe to say you enjoy the content, so why not subscribe? Stick around for more. We have videos coming out every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And if you like scary stories, it's gonna come like clockwork. I really hope you do enjoy. So that's it for today. I'd like to extend a huge thank you as always to my members and my patrons for their help, support, and contributions. You guys mean the world to me. Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in today and sticking around. Hope you guys have a really good week. Stay awesome. See you in the next one.